Little William Doyley was very ill-used during our stay here. He cried very much after his mother, and at times the natives, both men and women, would tie him up to a tree and beat him with bamboos. On my asking them to leave off, as well as I could by signs, they would shoot at me with their bows and arrows. On one occasion, when the women were beating him, I went and released him, and very nearly lost my life, for an arrow was shot within an inch of my head. They sometimes tied him up and left him for several hours. Sexton and myself were chiefly employed in climbing trees and breaking up firewood to cook the fish with. When they thought we had not enough, they would beat us with their hands and sometimes with the wood. They would at times take us with them in their canoes to catch fish, which they did by spearing, and with lines and hooks. Their lines were made of the fibers of the outside shell or husk of the coconuts, and the hooks were neatly made of tortoise shell. The number of Indians on this island amounted to about 60. They were merely residing on the island during the fishing season, for their home, as I afterward found out, was a great distance off. After remaining here, as near as I could recollect, 3 months, for I had almost lost all remembrance of dates, the Indians separated. One party took me and William Doyley with them in a canoe, and George Doyley and Sexton stayed with the other party. The party that took me along with them set sail early in the morning, and about the middle of the day reached another small island to the northward, where we stayed a day and a night. It had a sandy beach. The next morning we left this island and went to another, which was very flat and covered with low bushes. Here we stayed a fortnight. We then sailed northward, stopping at other islands, as long as we could get food for the party. This food consisted of fish and wild fruits. Our drink was water. We came to one island where we stayed about a month, and from thence went to another, which the natives called a rube, but which I afterwards learned was Darnley's Island. This place I have very good reason to recollect. It was here that we were first treated with some kindness by the natives. After staying here about a fortnight, we again embarked, returning by the way we had come to an island called by the natives Sareb, situated near to a reed. Poor little William seemed to wish to stop on any of the islands where we landed, and cried for a long time after being on board the canoe to return to them. After remaining on this island rather more than a week, a canoe with some of the natives of Murray's Island came there. They bought us of our captors for 2 bunches of bananas. We did not leave the island for 3 days after we were bought, but in that time went in the canoe with our new masters, who treated us very kindly. I was pleased to find that poor little William began to become more cheerful. We returned by way of Darnley's Island, stayed there for a few days, and then went to Murray's Island, where we afterwards lived until the period of our release by Captain Lewis in the Isabella. Upon our first landing on Murray's Island, the natives flocked around us, wondering who we were. They began asking those who had brought us a great many questions and speaking to us in a language very nearly like that of the other natives, and which I was just beginning to understand. Some of the children were very much frightened at us, and ran away as soon as they saw us. I soon learned that the name of the person who bought me was Dupper, and little William was given into the care of a native called Obi, who lived near Dupper's hut. This man soon got very fond of the little boy, as the child also became of him. Indeed, he seemed here to have quite forgotten his mother and father. My name among these people was Wacky, and that of William was Uas. I lived in the same hut with Dupper and his family, consisting of himself, his wife Panny, 3 sons, to all appearance young men, and 2 daughters, who were called Yope and Sarky. In this place I was made as comfortable as I could expect, under the circumstances in which I was placed. My wounds had continued open during my wanderings, but they now began to heal, and my appearance soon altered for the better. I had now gone through all that could be called suffering, but still I consistently wished that some European vessel would touch at the shore, and take me once more to see my friends and country. My new master, I should have called him father, for he behaved to me as kindly as he did to his sons, gave me a canoe about 60 feet long, which he purchased at New Guinea, the island that forms one side of the straits, Australasia being the other, for a large tomahawk and a bow and arrow. He also gave me a piece of ground, on which he taught me to grow yams, bananas, and coconuts. When we were not otherwise engaged, he taught me to shoot with the bow and arrow and to spear fish. Little William soon began to speak their language, and I also learned so much of it as to be able to converse in it with great ease, having no other than natives to speak to. It is more than probable that as I learned their language I should have forgotten that of my native country. Although William was in general more cheerful, he would now and then appear very uneasy. On these occasions I used to ask Dupper to allow me to sleep along with the child. This made him much more happy. As soon as he could speak their language pretty freely, he would go down to the beach with the other children of the island, and the effect of the sun on his skin became very apparent. In a few months he could not be distinguished by his color from the other children, his hair being the only thing by which he could be known at a distance from its light color. Murray's Island is about 2 miles across, and contains about 700 or 800 people. During my stay there, I never perceived any person who was in any manner above the rest of the natives, as regarded being a king or chief or anything of that kind, but the whole of the inhabitants seemed entirely independent of each other. The houses or huts of the natives are something in the form of a beehive, with a hole in the side, even with the ground, and about 2.5 feet in height, which serves for an entrance. When you go in, you must creep upon your hands and knees. They are made of placing a pole upright in the ground and putting stakes around it in a circle, at equal distances. These are then all bent inwards and fastened together near the top of the pole, to which they are firmly bound. The outside is then covered with dried banana leaves, which are very large. The entrance is merely a place in the side left uncovered. The pole, or supporter, is generally ornamented with shells, and at the top of it, which sticks out above the rest of the hut, they mostly fasten the largest one they can find. Some of the huts have a quantity of skulls arranged around the inside. Their canoes or boats are very large, mostly about 50 or 60 feet long, and some even larger than that. 2 masts, opposite to each them, with a sail hanging between them, are placed nearly in the center, but more towards the head of the canoe. The sail is made of plaited grass. When going with a side wind, they put one of the masts backwards, so that the sail stands slantingly. They use paddles of almost every shape, but the most general is merely a piece of wood cut flat, and broadest at the end which touches the water. They are expert in the use of the bow, which they call sarek. They make them of split bamboo, and they are so powerful that persons not accustomed to using the bow would scarcely be able to bend them. Their arrows are pieces of wood, made heavy at one end by a piece of stone or shell, sharpened at the end. Their clubs are made of hard black wood. The handle is made small, and has a knob at the end to prevent it from slipping out of the hand. They are very fond of all sorts of European articles, especially beads, glass, red cloth, bottles, and particularly of iron, which they call tora. When they see a ship, they say directly, "We will get some tora." They think iron is found in the white man's country in large rocks, and that we merely have to break pieces off as we want them. Of all things, they were most inquisitive about firearms, which they call by the same name as they do their bows. Dupper told me that some of their people had been killed by them, and they never could see what struck them. But I could not explain to him the way that a gun was made, for I scarcely knew myself. All I could tell him I did, but this only made him the more curious. Their usual way of catching fish is by spearing, but they also take the small ones with a kind of net, something like a sieve. One party disturbs the water by beating it with long bamboo sticks, and so drive the fish towards the other, who then spear or net them. Lobsters are caught in the following manner. A party will get on a sandbank at night, some of them holding a bunch of lighted coconut leaves above their heads, and the lobsters, seeing the light, leave their holes and are then speared by the others. Turtles abound on the islands, and are caught by the natives very dexterously. When we see them asleep on the water, a party of 7 or 8 go in a canoe, 4 of the party paddling very slowly and silently towards them, the others squatting on the forepart of the canoe with a rope fastened to their arms, and only their heads above the side of the canoe. Upon getting near enough, the parties in the canoe suddenly leap out and catch the turtle by the fins, by which they are then hauled into the boat. I have seen 3 caught at one time in this manner. After I had resided some months on this island, a native died in one of the huts near Dupper's. Upon his telling me of the event, he said he was certain something very dreadful would happen soon. This remark of Dupper's startled me, for it was the first death I had known on the island, and I could not help thinking of the fate of the crew of the Charles Eaton. An idea once or twice entered my head that harm was intended to me on account of the death of this man, but Dupper treated me just the same as usual. Soon after sunset, I went to rest, still feeling very uneasy. I had not lain very long when I heard a noise, as of a person rattling shells and breathing very hard. Dupper uttered a short sentence in a language which I did not understand, and quite different from that of Murray's Island, and then himself and all that were in the hut hid their faces in the sand. I asked Dupper what the noise was. He told me, the spirit of the dead man. The next day, I and some of the natives with little William were sitting under a bamboo fence close to the huts, when I heard the same noise a short distance off. On looking among the bushes, I saw two figures, the one red and the other white, with what appeared to be a fan over each of their heads. They began throwing stones at us, and the natives, who were about 20 in number, instead of getting up and driving them away, sat still and seemed to be totally unnerved. The figures were very short, not larger than children 14 years of age. I was told that they were the spirits of their departed friends. I have since taken a great deal of trouble to ascertain what these figures were, for they made me very uneasy. I took particular notice of them at the time, and have searched through all the huts, but never could discover any traces of dresses similar to those worn by the figures. The club is their principal weapon. With it they endeavor to strike the head, and one blow is generally fatal. Their spears, which they throw with great accuracy, are made of bamboo, with points made of sharpened shells. They also use them in their hand with great dexterity. Their bows are very dangerous instruments of warfare, as they sometimes poison their arrows. Being naked, they often get a slight scratch from one of these, and as they have no remedy for the poison, they die a painful and lingering death. I was one afternoon sitting upon one of the hills in the island when I saw a ship coming around the point of the island. My thoughts now turned upon the possibility of reaching their vessel, which approached nearer and nearer, and appeared as if intending to stop at the island. There was a merrymaking in the village on that day, but my desire to leave the savage life prevented me from taking part in it as usual. In fact, I wanted to draw the attention of those on board to myself before the natives should see her, but could not tell how to do so, the ship being so far off. I did not attain my object, notwithstanding all my endeavors. As soon as the ship was observed, Dupper, as he usually did when a vessel came into sight, painted my body black with a streak of red on the bridge of my nose, extending along my forehead over each of my eyebrows. My ears having been pierced on my arrival at Murray's Island, his wife and daughters hung tassels made of plaited grass to them. They also put ornaments around my neck, body, arms, wrists, and ankles. When the ship came near enough to us for their glasses to make observations, the natives broke branches off the trees and waved them. I did the same myself, and, to my unspeakable joy, saw her come near to the shore and drop her anchor. I then thought my deliverance certain, but was sadly disappointed that no boat came off to the shore. I went down to the beach along with Dupper and William and some of the natives, but still no boat appeared, and I waited till the night set in. Next morning, soon after sunrise, several canoes went away to the ship, Dupper and myself being in one of them. William was left on the island. We were in the third or fourth that got alongside, and we dropped directly under the stern. A rope was thrown from the vessel into our canoe, and I caught hold of it and tried to get on board by it. But I had sprained my wrist by a fall a day or two before, and, waving the branch had made it exceedingly painful, so that I could not climb. One of the crew held out a roll of tobacco to me, but I could not reach it, so I asked him to lower the boat for me to get in. The captain and officers were at that time bartering with the natives for curiosities and tortoiseshell. They had one of the cutters lowered, put their pistols and naked cutlasses into it. When the natives saw that, they thought mischief was intended to me and to themselves. They immediately let go the rope and paddled toward the shore. I stood up in the canoe, but Dupper took hold of me and laid me down in the middle of it. The boat rowed a little way after us, and then returned to the vessel. A few hours afterward, the boat came close to the beach, with, I believe, the captain on board, to shoot birds. One of the natives took little William on his shoulders and went down to the beach. He walked towards the boat and beckoned to the crew to come and take him. I had often mentioned to the natives that the white people would give them axes and bottles and iron for the little boy. I told them his relations were rich, and would be glad to give them a great deal if they would let them have him back. The captain made signs for the natives to go nearer to the boat, for he stopped at some distance, but neither party would approach the other, and the boat soon after returned to the vessel. I was kept among the bushes all this time by Dupper and his sons, but I could plainly see everything that took place. The ship sailed next morning, and we were both left on the island. All my hopes of deliverance by means of this vessel were thus put to an end. The vessel's sailing without me made such an impression upon my mind that for 3 or 4 days I could eat no food, and at length became extremely ill. I think at times I was light-headed, for I did not know what I was doing. When I got better, which was in about a week, the idea that I should end my days among the savages settled upon me, and I became quite melancholy. My health after this began visibly to decline, and it grieved me to see William was getting thin and sickly as well, for I had no remedy in case of illness, nor did I ever see the natives make use of anything either to prevent or cure diseases to which they are subject. One morning Dupper was trying to straighten a piece of an iron bolt, and was beating it very hard with a piece of stone, without being able to make any impression upon it. I told him to make a large fire and put the iron into it, which would soften it. He did so, and his astonishment was very great when he found it answered the purpose. He was very much pleased with me for this discovery, and often told the other natives of it. All of them had a piece of iron, obtained from a different wreck, which had happened on the island, or by trading with the Europeans, and we were after this frequently employed in straightening or altering the shape of these iron articles, as it might suit the various fancies of their owners. After we had been about a year on Murray's Island, Dupper told me that the natives intended to go on a trading voyage to Dowder. This, I afterward learned, was the name they called New Guinea, and I was to be one of the party. For this journey, 12 large canoes, about 60 feet long, each containing from 10 to 16 persons, men and women and children, were prepared. As many shells as the natives could collect were put into the canoes, and we set sail. The natives of New Guinea wear these shells for ornaments, and in return for them the Murray Islanders get canoes, bows and arrows, and feathers. When we came to Darnley's Island, Dupper left me in charge of a native of that place named Aggie, telling me he was afraid that the New Guinea people would steal or murder me. The party did not stay long on the island, for the next morning they left me, not expecting to see them again for a month. How great was my surprise when on the following evening Dupper returned to the island where he had left me. I asked him whether he had changed all his shells so quickly, or whether anything serious had happened that he had come back so soon. He told me that they had stopped at an island called Jarmuth to pass the night, and that a quarrel ensued between one of the natives of the island and a Murray Islander named Naboo, and Dupper's 2 nephews about a pipe of tobacco. Another of the natives of Jarmuth had attempted to take from one of the Murray Islanders his mako, an ornament worn about the calf of the leg made of the bark of bamboo. These outrages had caused a fight with bows and arrows, in which several of the Jarmouth people were wounded, and one of them shot through the body, but none of them Murray Islanders. On this account the voyage was not taken, but we all returned to Murray's Island. About 3 days after this, the Jarmuth people sent a message offering peace, but it was not accepted, and they were still unreconciled when I came away. The time of our deliverance, however, which we had so long given up as hopeless, was now near at hand. The years we had passed among the savages had not taken from my memory the scenes of home and happiness and England. But since the departure of the last vessel that touched at the shore of the island, the thoughts of my friends and relations had come to my remembrance, as forcibly as if it was only the day before that had been passed in their company, and in my mind it was but a week since events of the most pleasing kind had happened, and I had brooded over these reflections till my body had wasted to a mere skeleton. Through the melancholy exertions of my mind, aided no doubt by the sickness which neglect, thus involuntarily induced, had attacked my weakened frame. I used to delight to tell William about his father and mother, how they left a far-off country in a large canoe, and of the storm, when he was nearly killed, how his mother kissed and fondled him to her bosom, when I brought him to her. Then, that he had a brother, who came with us into the ship and played with him, till in the storm the ship was wrecked and broke to pieces, how we were all nearly starved to death, and at last escaped on the rafts, that his father and mother and nurse with many more men were killed by the natives of Boyden, and we had left his brother there among the savages and had not seen him since. And of Dupper's buying us and bringing us to this island, and how kind he was. These recitals would bring tears into the eyes of my young, wondering listener, showing that the impression was made upon his mind. How his tears pleased me. His simple questions upon these occasions were answered with an eagerness which showed with what deepness thought and fixed them on my memory. I need not add how these things made me love the infant that God had thus thrown, as I thought, into my charge, nor how I resolved the endeavor, as far as my means would enable me, to cherish and protect him in his helplessness. I asked Dupper to inquire what had become of George Doyley and John Sexton, if he should at any time happen to meet with one of the natives of Boyden. He could not learn any tidings for a long time, but at length he told me that he understood they were both dead. Some time after this, I heard two of the natives conversing, and one of them said that the youngest white boy at Boyden, this was George Doyley, had got sick and died, and that the other one, John Sexton, had been speared by one of the natives. One spring, Dupper's brother was obliged to leave his house to do some business, and some of Dupper's family with myself were asked to go there to take care of it during his absence. This house was on the hills. The next morning, I saw a vessel come round the point of the island, and soon after drop her anchor near the shore. I immediately went down to the beach, where I saw several canoes paddling off. I attempted to get into one of them, but Dupper would not let me. I tried very hard to prevail on him to let me go, but for some time he would not consent. He told me to hide myself among the trees on the hills, for he was sure the people on board the ship would kill me. After much persuasion upon my telling him that I did not want to leave him, but only to procure some axes and other articles, he with reluctance allowed me to get into his canoe. We then went off to the ship. I was fearful lest some misunderstanding should take place, so I asked Dupper to request silence until I had spoken with the people in the ship. The natives accordingly did not speak. When we got within a short distance, a person hailed me, and asked what ship I came out in. I answered, "In the Charles Eaton." He then asked me whether there were any more white people on the island. I replied, "Only a child about 4 or 5 years old." He then told me to come alongside, which I did, and then was taken on board. My agitation was so great that I could scarcely answer the questions which were put to me, and it was some time before I recovered my self-possession. Captain Lewis took me down into the cabin and gave me a shirt, a pair of trousers, and a straw hat. He ordered some bread and cheese and beer for me, but the thoughts of again revisiting my home and friends prevented me from eating much of it. He asked me what had become of the remaining passengers and crew. I told him, as near as I could, all that had happened, that they were all murdered, with the exception of 5 men who had escaped in a cutter. He then told me that his ship had been fitted out in search of us. For this kindness on the part of government, I cannot enough express my sincere thanks, and my sorrow that it should meet with so small a return. Dupper and several of the natives had come on board, and Captain Lewis told me to desire them to bring William. They said he was on the other side of the island. This was the case, but that they would bring him the next day. Captain Lewis then said that he would allow no trading till the child was on board. Most of the natives returned to the island in the evening, and those that remained slept on deck, with a sail to cover them. Dupper and Obie were allowed to sleep with me. Next day, the natives made a great many excuses against bringing William on board. They said he was crying and would not leave the women. I told them that unless they brought him, they would not be allowed to trade. About the middle of the day he was brought. At first he seemed frightened at the strangers, and did not like parting with his old black friends. But I did my best to pacify him, and he soon became used to the new faces. One of the sailors made him a frock and trousers, and another gave him a cap. He looked very curious in them, but at first they made him uncomfortable. I have the cap now in my possession. The natives of these islands are much given to pilfering. One of them was seen taking a knife, and was immediately sent out of the ship. I saw Dupper steal a pair of compasses, but I said nothing about it to anyone. I did not like to offend him. The next night Captain Lewis amused the islanders with a display of rockets and firing of great guns, with which they were highly delighted. Before the ship sailed, Dupper went and collected a quantity of coconuts, yams, and tobacco, which he brought on board for me. He then asked who was to have the care of my canoe, bow, and arrows, and other articles. I said his son, Bowdew, with which he seemed very well satisfied. He seemed to feel pained at parting. He cried, hugged me, and then cried again. At last he told me to come back soon and bring him plenty of things, and not to forget Torah. I then bade farewell to the poor old man and the rest of the natives, who patted and fondled William in his new dress, and on Tuesday, the 28th of June, at about 8 o'clock in the morning, we left Murray's Island. The Isabella schooner had been fitted out to search the islands for the white people who had been shipwrecked in the Charles Eaton, or might be left on them from any shipwreck. I went with the vessel to all those islands they had not searched before they discovered us, and my speaking the language was of great service. On one of the islands we found a figure made of tortoiseshell, painted something like a man's face, round which were tied 45 skulls. These we took on board. We observed that they were more or less injured. Several of them were supposed to have belonged to Europeans, and one to a woman. Our voyage was prosperous, and we arrived at Sydney without any accident. Great excitement had been caused in this place by the melancholy disappearance of so many persons, and the rumor of our story and of the fate of the Charles Eaton and crew made William and myself objects of great curiosity. I was taken to the governor of the colony, Sir Richard Bourke, to whom I related as much of this narrative as I could recollect. I had 40 shillings given to me by the captain of the Japan, a whaler that we passed on our journey home. This money enabled me to buy some clothes. Sir Richard Bourke placed some money in the hands of a person in Sydney to defray my expenses during the time I stayed there, the remainder of which sum I have received since my arrival in London. A lady named Mrs. Slade, whose husband is a governor officer in Sydney, hearing that the name of one of the boys brought by the Isabella was Doyley, made inquiries respecting him, and found that he was the son of an old and esteemed friend. She immediately requested permission to take charge of poor William, who was accordingly given into her charge. Our health, which had been improving during the passage home, now began to recover quickly. We had every attention paid to us that was possible. Our cancers were subjected to medical treatment, and in a few weeks I was completely cured. I stayed here 5 months, hoping to accompany William to England, but a boy threw a stone at him, which severely hurt his head, and threw him again on a bed of sickness, and deferred his departure. At the time I left, he was recovering fast. Not wishing to be longer dependent on the bounty of any person, and an opportunity offering of a situation on board the Florentia, commanded by Captain Delois, bound to London, I took my farewell of William and my other kind friends, and went on board in the month of January. We set sail, and experienced a little rough weather on our passage, but arrived in London without accident in August. I had now been absent from England nearly 4 years, and it is impossible to describe my feelings when again putting my foot on its long-desired ground. None but those similarly situated can understand them. All I wish the kind reader to do is to avoid the savages of Boydan, but lend a helping hand to civilize the kind natives of Murray's Island and the Indians of Torres Straits.